ayes are 217, the nays are 215. Majority voting in the affirmative, the concurrent resolution is adopted.
Not exactly a rounding applause after Republicans went through an inordinate amount of arm twisting to pass basically an agreement to start working on a budget. And that vote should scare a lot of people tonight, including millions of Americans who voted for Donald Trump.
Indeed, I agree with that assessment. Now, President Donald Trump's big, beautiful budget bill, which includes massive tax cuts that overwhelmingly benefit the rich and cuts to critical programs that, of course, benefit the poor, has passed its first hurdle. With a 217 to 215 vote, House Republicans managed to narrowly pass the framework for Trump's agenda. This wasn't the final budget bill, but rather a budget resolution which instructs committees to come up with spending cuts that would theoretically pay for Trump's tax cuts. But the math really doesn't add up at all. So here's what the Republican budget plan lays out.
The budget resolution aims to cut at least $2 trillion in federal spending over 10 years, includes at least $4.5 trillion in tax cuts, hoping to extend Trump's 2017 cuts, which expire at the end of the year, and raises the debt limit by $4 trillion. While specific budget cuts haven't been determined, Democrats warning Medicaid, the healthcare program for low-income Americans and those with disabilities, is expected to be slashed.
It's actually a lot worse than that. So why don't we get into the specifics of what Trump, along with Republican lawmakers, is trying to ram through Congress. First, the president wants an extension and possibly an expansion of his 2017 tax cuts. Major parts of those tax cuts from Trump's first term, of course, are set to expire. And look, most taxpayers, including working class Americans, will in fact experience a tax hike if Congress doesn't vote to extend them. However, extending them will cost quite a bit of money. Those provisions could add roughly $5 trillion to the national debt over 10 years, according to congressional bookkeepers. But Trump wants more and has ordered Republicans to include provisions that would further cut the corporate tax rate from 21 to a mere 15%. He also wants to end taxes on tips, Social Security benefits, and overtime wages, which honestly, I'm personally open to hearing more about. But how those provisions are written really does make all the difference in the world. Because look, you don't want a loophole that would allow high income earners to reclassify their salaries as tips. Trump would also raise the $10,000 cap on state and local tax deductions, also known as SALT. So filers who live in high tax states like California can deduct more on their federal taxes. Just based on these taxes alone, these tax cuts alone, the price tag on Trump's budget would absolutely explode. Together, the package could add as much as $11.25 trillion over the next 10 years to the United States' existing $36.2 trillion in debt, and that's according to the Nonpartisan Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. And Republicans also made sure to tack on additional spending for the Defense Department, even though Elon Musk and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth have been pretending as if they're going to cut the Pentagon. The GOP has sworn off cutting the defense budget, $825 billion in fiscal 2024. And its reconciliation plan would actually increase defense spending by $100 billion over 10 years. So please explain to me how exactly is it fiscally responsible for a country that just spent $1 trillion servicing its debt last year to spend more while taking in way less tax revenue? Oh right, Republicans want to pretend they can pay for all of this with deep cuts to programs that the poorest among us rely on. The House Energy and Commerce Committee, which controls the purse strings for Medicare and Medicaid, for instance, was issued instructions to cut at least $880 billion from the national debt over 10 years. So while there's no specific mention of cutting Medicaid in this budget blueprint, it does have instructions directed toward the committee that handles Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, essentially telling them, you need to cut $880 billion. Gee, I wonder where the money's gonna come from. Now, while those cuts will absolutely devastate Americans who need these programs to survive, they still wouldn't close the massive gap left behind by Trump's tax giveaways. And if you're hoping that the legislative filibuster in the Senate will block whatever finalized bill Republicans hatch up, the reconciliation process only requires a simple majority of 51 rather than 60 votes. And I want to pause here for a second and really reiterate that. When Republicans want something, all of a sudden we don't hear a damn thing about the Senate parliamentarian. We don't hear a damn thing about the legislative filibuster because they do what it takes to pass a reconciliation bill that only requires a simple majority of 51 senators. But when Biden was pretending like he wanted to pass important provisions in his agenda, things like ensuring that there's paid family leave when a family brings a child into this world, financial support for, maybe the sandwich generation. They're taking care of kids, but their parents are also aging and they're tasked with taking care of their elderly parents and they're missing out on income as a result of having all this responsibility thrown on their shoulders. All of those provisions, we can't do it. We can't do it because we need 60 senators to pass these bills, to pass Biden's agenda. And we can't do it because of that legislative filibuster. All of a sudden, though, we're not hearing about a legislative filibuster. It's amazing, isn't it? It's almost as if the Democrats didn't actually want to pass those provisions as part of Biden's agenda. But the GOP still has a long way to go before legislation makes it to Trump's desk because there are some serious cracks within the party. Conservative hardliners want deeper cuts to programs that Americans across the country rely on. On the other hand, the more moderate Republicans know they'll have hell to pay once their constituents are denied Medicaid due to what's currently being proposed. Trump even got on the phone to pressure any Republican who was waffling on passing this budget blueprint. He called Tennessee Congressman Tim Burchett, Indiana Congresswoman Victoria Spartz, Ohio's Warren Davidson, and Kentucky's Thomas Massie. All of them folded, except for Massie.
But Kentucky Congressman Thomas Massie not budging, concerned about the overall costs.
We are cutting taxes and we're not going to cut spending to match it, so the deficit's going to go up. That's what this bill does.
I gotta say, man, he might literally be the only principled member of the Republican Party. Doesn't matter how much Trump tries to pressure him, doesn't matter how much the entirety of the Republican caucus tries to pressure him. Thomas Massie stays focused, he's on the straight and narrow. I might not agree with him, but look, credit where credit is due when someone actually has principles in Congress, because there aren't many people that I can say that about. Now, funny enough, Congresswoman Spartz was the one who talked a big game prior to the vote, declaring that I never change my vote without changes in the rules or changes in procedures or changes in the taxes. Never did and never will. She changed her vote. But it's easier to pass the framework of Trump's agenda without passing an actual policy bill, and the GOP hasn't done that yet. And to be sure, there are still some sticking points for House Republicans in Congress. For instance, moderates fear its $2 trillion in spending cuts will force the GOP to slash Medicaid benefits, a political third rail in toss-up districts. But hardliners say budget cuts don't go far enough. And while every House Republican fears the wrath of Daddy Trump, like the absolute weenies that they are, they're also kind of worried about the political consequences of ripping resources away from poor and working class constituents, only to partially pay for tax cuts that benefit the wealthiest the most. Take Representative Juan Kiscomani from Arizona, who represents a swing district that heavily relies on Medicaid. Look, he should be panicking right now because he has a difficult decision to make. Does he protect Medicaid for the people of his district by standing up to his colleagues, or does he screw them over by denying them health care? Now, Representative Jeff Van Drew from New Jersey, who actually used to be a Democrat, said that he called Trump to ask him to reiterate his pledge to not cut Medicaid. This is what Drew was referencing.
Social Security won't be touched, other than if there's fraud or something we're going to find it's going to be strengthened, but won't be touched. Medicare, Medicaid, none of that stuff is going to be touched.
Nothing.
You don't have to. Now, if there are illegal migrants in the system, we're going to get them out of the system and all of that fraud, but it's not going to be touched.
So Congressman Van Drew wanted Trump to repeat that, to basically ease the nerves of Americans who are concerned that resources will be ripped away from them, that Medicaid will still be intact. Now, Congressman Van Drew pleaded, quote, "Don't touch seniors' Medicare, don't touch or don't cut Medicaid, because it isn't just for lazy welfare people, it's for real people. That's the new Republican Party, a populist party, a party of working people, a party of blue collar people." Well, I mean, we'll see what happens. I think there might be Republican voters who think that. There might even be a populist Republican in Congress or two. Jeff Hawley in the Senate, certainly comes to mind. But I don't know if I'm really buying that the whole of the Republican Party, I mean, the politicians are all of a sudden these big populists. Now, Trump didn't say anything at the urging of Congressman Van Drew, but reporters did ask Trump to weigh in on the possible cuts to Medicaid today. Here's what he said.
The spending bill that passed last night aims to cut $2 trillion.
Right.
Can you guarantee that Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security will not be touched?
Yeah, I mean, I have said it so many times, you shouldn't be asking me that question, okay? This will not be read my lips. It won't be read my lips anymore. We're not going to touch it. Now, we are going to look for fraud. I'm sure you're okay with that, like people that shouldn't be on, people that are illegal aliens and others, criminals in many cases, and that's with Social Security. We have a lot of people. You see that immediately when you see people that are 200 years old that are being sent checks for Social Security. Some of them are actually being sent checks, so we're tracing that down.
Okay, so they don't want to take Medicaid away from Americans who need it and deserve it. They just want to root out any fraud within the Medicaid system. And we're to believe that there's $880 billion of waste, fraud, and abuse in the Medicaid system. I'm really not buying it. The math just doesn't really add up here. And even if they manage to do that, which again, I'm skeptical, it doesn't pay for the tax cuts, not even close. And honestly, sorry, Jeffy boy, the party you defected to has had its sights set on cutting Medicaid and screwing over the people that you say you want to protect. In fact, earlier this week, when Speaker Mike Johnson was asked if he was willing to offer concessions to Republican lawmakers who were worried about slashing Medicaid, he simply replied, no. To be fair, he also reminded reporters that the budget blueprint doesn't include any specific cuts to Medicaid yet. But the committee that controls the program is now directed to cut nearly $1 trillion from the program over the next decade. No biggie, right? Now, different Republican lawmakers took issue with other areas of the budget framework, including 3 Miami area members who apparently spoke to House Speaker Mike Johnson to demand that he reinstate funding to protect Venezuelan migrants who have temporary protected status, which prevents them from deportation. Trump has actually moved to end their temporary protected status, but the South Florida Republicans could lose support from their robust Venezuelan constituency if that happens. In addition to the dissent among House GOP, Senate Republicans are also on a completely different page. For one, they want to pursue 2 separate reconciliation bills instead of one big, beautiful bill that Trump prefers. There's also a great deal of disagreement among Senate Republicans in regard to the Medicaid cuts. Senator Josh Hawley told reporters that there are going to be a lot of concerns over the Medicaid cuts. I realize it's just a broad instruction to that committee, but I think there will be concerns about that and what that may lead to. Politico reports that Hawley said he expected Republicans to support work requirements for Medicaid beneficiaries, but reject any cuts that could hit working Americans. But how the hell will this fat tax cut bill be paid for? Senate Republicans also aren't committing to keeping the House's planned $4 trillion debt ceiling hike. Some Senate conservatives have warned they won't support a budget resolution that includes a debt limit hike, though most of the House's hardliners ultimately accepted it. Again, a lot of politicians love to talk a big talk, but when push comes to shove, they tend to fold, especially when Trump is urging it. Now, further complicating things is the fact that Republican leadership, like Senate Majority Leader John Thune, want a permanent extension of Trump's 2017 tax cuts, which is insane, but that wasn't included in the House's budget blueprint. So we're uncertain what the final bill is going to look like. We know that there is some infighting with Republicans, but make no mistake about it. Right now, at this very moment, for Democrats who are serious about the future of their party, and honestly, these days I really question if any of them even exist, they should be doing what Senator Bernie Sanders has been doing in touring the country, going to Republican strongholds to inform constituents about what is transpiring in regard to proposed cuts to these social plans, to these social programs that help the most vulnerable among us. Look, I don't believe for a second that the majority of Trump supporters signed on to cuts to Medicaid. I think they agree that there is waste, fraud, and abuse. They want to root it out. In fact, the majority of Americans, including Democrats, agree that something needs to be done about waste, fraud, and abuse. But when they think about waste, fraud, and abuse, I'm gonna go ahead and guess they're thinking about the Pentagon, which has failed to pass a single audit. They have failed 7 audits in a row. They're probably considering the fact that our Medicaid system is being price gouged by pharmaceutical companies, which have this amazing benefit of never having to negotiate drug prices with our Medicaid system because Medicaid is literally banned from doing so. How is that okay? Why are American taxpayers being price gouged through our Medicaid system by pharmaceutical companies? But those things aren't really being talked about, are they? So while all this focus is on cutting SNAP benefits, food stamps, Medicaid, I want to know, why aren't the Republicans focusing on where the real waste is? Why are they focusing on cutting programs that help the poor only to partially pay for tax cuts that will overwhelmingly benefit the rich? I don't know. I guess we're gonna have to wait and see.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.